What is up, everybody? Welcome into this Wednesday episode of Flippin' Bats, where we have an absolute legend, Hall of Fame pitcher, Tom Glavine, is joining me. I grew up a huge Atlanta Braves fan. To have Tom Glavine on the show is going to be an absolute blast. And we are going to talk about everything. This current Braves team, Spencer Strider, that Braves broadcast with him, Smoltz, Chipper, and Francoeur earlier in the year. The Hall of Fame. He has a good take on the Hall of Fame and Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens and what he feels about whether they should be in or whether they shouldn't be. The strike zone, if we should go to an automated strike zone or not. And of course, so many stories. John Smoltz stories, Bobby Cox stories, Deion Sanders stories. This just ends up being a really, really fun conversation with one of the best pitchers to ever do it. And I hope you guys are excited to listen to it because, man, am I excited for you guys to hear this. So without further ado, let's welcome in Hall of Fame pitcher, Tom Glavine.
Fly ball onto the track, at the wall, it's gone! Home run!
Turns on a ball, deep right field, and gone!
What a game, what a moment. All right, and I am pumped to welcome in now Hall of Fame pitcher Tom Glavine. Tom, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey, so I want to start with earlier this year, you were part of a broadcast with the Braves that involved you, Smoltz, Chipper, Francoeur, and it looked like, just watching it, that you guys had so much fun doing it. How cool was that experience for you guys?
You know, it was a lot of fun. I think obviously the four of us together works. You know, we all have a great relationship with each other individually and then certainly collectively. So, you know, it works. And we all, you know, we've all played together. We've all been around each other a lot since we've been done playing. So there's a familiarity there. And you know, I think we were all a little bit, I don't know if concerned is the right word, but I think maybe curious as to what exactly that would look like and what we were going to do and how it would come off.
Yeah.
And you know, I think Valley Sports, you know, to their credit, they really didn't have many guidelines. They just said, look, we want you guys to pretend you're in a bar watching a game and people are watching with you. And I think that's what we tried to do. And I think by all accounts, we did it. I think people had a really good time that first time watching it. You know, second time was a little more, I guess, some elements of a traditional broadcast. We actually did do a little play-by-play. We actually did remind people what the score was from time to time. But, you know, that first time was just, you know, telling stories and having fun. And if people paid attention to what the score was, then that was great too.
Did you have a favorite moment that happened at some point throughout that first game?
You know, there were a few. I mean, you know, obviously, I know you guys know Smoltzy. You know, he comes armed with material, so he had lots of stats and lots of things for us to rag on each other about. So that's always fun doing that. But you know, look at obviously the ending of the game, right? I mean, you could not have asked for a better script to do something like that, and I think that's why we were all not leery, but a little concerned about, you know, round two doing that. That first game, it couldn't have been any better. I mean, it was a slugfest with a walk-off home run between two arch rivals. So, you know, the walk-off home run and the combination of Smoltzy not having time to make a home run call, and then, you know, Frenchie coming up with, you know, the poor Larry a crown, which, you know, grew legs and turned into a T-shirt. It was a pretty good ending.
So that game did involve Spencer Strider on the mound. It was Strider against Justin. And Smoltz recently said of Strider, he is so far ahead of any of us that have ever pitched in a Braves uniform. When you hear him say that and you think about Spencer Strider, do you agree with that statement?
You know, I would add the caveat at this stage of his career. Obviously, I mean, I think as time went on, I think all of us evolved and became better and did some things differently. Now, look at, I think I say this about just about every guy that comes to the big leagues now. They have better stuff, and they're probably a little bit more polished in some ways than I was, and John probably was. But at the same time, I hesitate to say that because I don't think they know how to pitch as well as we did when they get to the big league. Simply because, you look at me and John, we had a number of minor league innings under our belt. These guys don't anymore. They're getting called up to the big leagues with, less than 100 innings of minor league baseball routinely now. So, the art of pitching is not necessarily there, but I think at a younger age, these guys are learning. Obviously, they throw with velocity, but they're learning breaking balls earlier. They're learning changeups earlier. I don't think John and I really did that. I mean, I didn't have a changeup really until 2 years in the big league. So, that part of it is they're much more advanced, but the pitching side of it, I think, is a little bit less. But in Spencer's case, he's got a good idea what he's trying to do. But I think more importantly, he knows who he is and he knows what makes him successful. And that's kind of the basis for what he does. I think a lot of guys at his age, myself included, if you ask them what they were good at, I'm not sure they had an answer. If you ask them, hey, what pitch do I need to throw in order to throw a strike? I'm not sure they would know all the time, but I think Spencer knows who he is and does a good job of making that his foundation. But having said that, there's some things that I think we all would like to see him develop and do and add, and that'll come with time.
I have Smoltz on the show every single week, and we talk current baseball. We share a bunch of stories. It's always a lot of fun, but I know you probably have a million, and some you can share and some you can't share. But when I talk about John Smoltz, what is a story? What is one of the first stories that comes to mind for you?
Oh man, there's Smoltzy is just high energy, right? I mean, he's a 12-year-old kid trapped now in a 50-year-old man's body. So that's just how he is. That's how he's wired. And it's nonstop all the time. The kind of guy that if you went on a long weekend vacation with him, you'd be worn out by the end of the weekend. There's no question about it because there's no downtime. But there obviously, look, he's I saw him one time on a bus in New York. He had that little black book with all the golf courses and connections and whatever in there. And he couldn't find it. He lost it on the bus, and you'd have thought that his 1-year-old child had disappeared. I mean, it was the panic was just off the charts. I've seen, you see things between him and Maddux, that happened all the time. One of Greg's favorite things was whenever John would be driving a rental car, if we were coming back from the golf course, particularly in New York City, stopped at a red light, he'd wait for the crosswalk to be maximum fullness and honk on the horn so that everybody's looking at John. John's beat red, embarrassed, and pissed off, and all the above. So it was just a fun dynamic. I mean, John never did anything too stupid, other than which he denies when he tried to iron his shirt when he had it on and burned himself. But other than that, it was just goofy fun.
One of my favorite managers to watch growing up. I grew up a big Braves fan, was watching the Braves every night on TBS, and watching Bobby Cox every night was just as eventful as the game oftentimes because of all the ejections and all the passion he would bring to a game. Do you have a favorite Bobby Cox ejection story?
Yeah, I tell this one a lot, and it was Maddux's fault. It was back in those days. We had analytics in our day. We just didn't call it analytics, and we didn't look at it the way these guys look at it so profusely nowadays. But we convinced Bobby back in those days that the guy who was pitching the next day always kept the pitching chart. So we'd keep score, and you counted every pitch and every result, and you essentially kept score, but you were counting pitches, whether they were balls, strikes, swings and misses, foul balls, whatever. And then you turned it over to the pitching coach after the game, and he processed all that information. So we convinced Bobby that it was much better for us to do the pitching chart in the clubhouse rather than on the bench, which there was some truth to it. It's hard to see where pitches are when you're sitting on the bench, but it was more so that we could just kind of sprawl out on the couch, watch the game, relax. We know we're pitching tomorrow, so we're just taking it easy. Anyway, there was a game that Doggy was doing the chart, and there was a lot of bickering back and forth between the dugouts with the home plate umpire. So I went upstairs about the third inning to get a cup of coffee. And I said to Doggy, I said, hey, what's the deal with this umpire? There's a lot of arguing going back and forth. Is he not having a good game? And Doggy's like, he's not bad. He's kind of kind of missed some on both sides, but he's been pretty consistent, but he's been fair in terms of what he's missed. Bobby came up no sooner than Greg got that out of his mouth to get a cup of coffee and asked Greg the same question. And then Greg flips the switch, and it's like, oh my God, Bobby, he's terrible. He's missed so many pitches. He's been terrible all night long. And so Bobby goes out, and I was like, Doggy, what are you doing? He's like, what? And I said, well, he's going to go downstairs and get thrown out of this game now. You know that. And he said, oh yeah, I know. So sure enough, next half inning, there was a close pitch, and there goes Bobby, and he got thrown out of the game. So, but that's how he was. I think that's why everybody loved playing for him, right? I mean, I've seen times where, Bobby would sit on the bench and he'd have his readers on, and they'd kind of be hanging down like this, right? And he'd be, looking at his lineup card and not even watching the game, because he's going through his lineup card and trying to figure out, all right, who do I have in the bullpen? Who's going to get up next? Who might I pinch hit? All, the things that he's thinking about. And he would hear somebody in the dugout bitch about a pitch. And without skipping a beat, it would be, punch a hole in your mask. Where is that pitch? But that's how he was. He fought tooth and nail for every inch he could get for us players. And I think that's why everybody loved playing for him.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. Well, this current Braves team is just won their 6th division title in a row. And I've said this many times. I think your team's 14 straight is one of the records we might not see broken in sports. 14 straight division titles is absolutely remarkable. How would you describe winning 14 division titles in a row?
It's crazy. I mean, I agree with you. I think it kind of puts it in perspective, right? When you see this current edition,
yep,
and how good they've been and how dominant they've been, and they've won 6 straight. Well, you got 8 more to go. And it seems almost impossible. Now, this group's going to be together for a while, and if everybody stays healthy, who knows? But, I think it's the kind of thing that over time you appreciate it more. It's hard to completely appreciate it when you're going through it, because you're just focused on doing it again. We knew every year coming into spring training that we were the team to beat, and we had a lot to defend and a lot to live up to, and we tried to do that, and there was some pressure in that, obviously. But we knew we were good. We knew what we needed to do, but we knew obviously it wasn't going to last forever. But while we were doing it, we just wanted it to last one more year. We just wanted it to last that year that we were in. And we had some close calls along the way. We had some bumps along the way, but inevitably, I think that our talent took over, and over the course of 162 games, our depth played a big part in that. But it's crazy. I mean, I think I appreciate it more now, looking back at it, and probably even because of what this current team has accomplished. And then, like I said, you think they're not even halfway there yet. It's pretty crazy. I do. I think that puts it all into perspective. Everybody's talking about how good this team is, how long they're going to be good for, this crazy run they're on. And then you look up and, like you said, they're not even halfway there to the 14 straight that you guys were able to accomplish. I want to ask you a little bit about your being drafted to play hockey, which is remarkable to me, because baseball players, there's not typically that crossover of baseball and hockey. You see oftentimes athletes and baseball with another sport, but you're one of the players that really only comes to mind when I think of MLB draft and then the NHL draft, which happened 5 days later, by the way. So you're drafted for baseball, you get drafted to play hockey. Was it at all a hard decision for you to end up sticking with baseball? Yeah, a little bit, but not so much in a professional format. It was more, did I want to go to college and go that route versus signing professionally to go play baseball? It was the kind of thing that, looking back at it, and, because people ask me, what kind of baseball player, what kind of hockey player were you? I was a better hockey player at that stage of the game than I was a pitcher. As a pitcher at that stage of the game, I just threw the ball. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I had a good arm. Like most kids at that stage, right? My changeup in those days was, all right, well, let me try to throw this next pitch harder than I threw the last one. That's how I changed speeds. I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
But I had a good arm, but as a hockey player, I was really polished as a hockey player. I was a good hockey player. So that's what it came down to. I mean, my dad had a small construction company up in Boston, and so to have a scholarship was a big deal. To take that burden off his shoulders was a big deal to me, and the decision to forego that didn't come lightly. But I think I sat down. Obviously, with baseball, it's a lot different than hockey. Baseball, they draft you, they want to sign you, particularly a high draft pick. So the Braves came after me right away and tried to get me signed. And ultimately, once they got the money to where, okay, if this doesn't work out, I can go back and I can pay for my own college, and my dad doesn't have to deal with that. And kind of took that burden away. Then I felt like when I went over the pros and cons of both sports, there were a few different things back then. I mean, obviously back in the middle 80s, hockey players weren't making a lot of money. They are now.
Yeah.
Hockey players weren't playing into their late 30s. They are now. The health side of it was a much bigger positive for baseball. But I think inevitably it came down to I was a left-handed pitcher, and that gave me an advantage in baseball that I didn't have in hockey. At 6 feet tall and 175 pounds coming out of high school, I was no different than just about anybody else that got drafted in the NHL. So I figured I better take advantage of this left-handed thing and see how it works out. And it worked out all right.
Speaking of multiple sports, you were teammates with one of the best multi-sport athletes to ever do it, and Deion Sanders. How would you describe, Tom, Deion Sanders, the baseball player?
Very raw. I think that's the thing with Deion as a baseball player that I'm curious about, is, had he dedicated more time to that, how good could he have been? Football, he was obviously extremely gifted. Probably didn't have to work as hard at football as he did at baseball. And I think that's an important aspect of it all. And in baseball, I think he, like I said, he was raw. He had a ton of talent. There was not many more things more fun than watching him hit a ball in the gap and go from home plate to third base. It was scary sometimes. I can promise you that if we were on base ahead of him and he hit a ball in the gap, that it was like, oh my God, he's going to catch me by the time we both get to third base. So it was a little intimidating, but he was fun to watch. And it's funny. I think that obviously he's very much in the news right now with everything he's doing at Colorado and that program. And I've read a lot of stories about him. And, I think a lot of guys have the same perception of him that I did as a teammate. He was a good teammate. He really was. And there was, I've said to people, when we signed Deion, I think like a lot of guys who I've read articles that have been written about Deion lately is, we all had the same question, like, oh my God, what's this guy going to be like? And he was a great teammate. But I think Deion was really at the forefront of the whole marketing thing. When you were in the clubhouse and there was nobody around, he was Deion. But the minute a camera was on him or he was outside somewhere, it was prime time. And he knew how to flip that switch, and he was really, really good at it. But he was a ton of fun to be around.
What do you think makes him a great teammate that also makes him as successful as a coach as he is right now? Is there any correlation there? Because like you said, he's probably the biggest topic in sports right now is how good of a job he's doing coaching. Does that surprise you at all that he's having the success that he is right now?
I mean, sometimes, yeah, because I think a lot of guys who are great players, it doesn't translate as coaches, right? Because I think that, and I find myself doing that sometimes when I would coach my kids. You try to teach them something, you try to tell them something, and they can't get it. And sometimes you get frustrated because of your ability to get things or your ability to be successful. Like, why can't you get this, right? And it's the kind of thing that if I tell you 100 times and you haven't gotten it, then I clearly have to tell you 101 because you don't know when it's going to click, right? And so I think a lot of really good players have a hard time with that patience side of it. But I think with Deion, look, Deion's a very faithful guy, right? He makes no mistake about his faith in God, and I think that's what drives him, and it gives him there's a peace about him when you're around him, but I think too, when you listen to him talk, and I think this is true, and it might be easier for Deion because of the success that he's had over his career, but he really doesn't care what people think about him. He does his thing. He does his thing the way he thinks it needs to be done, and that's all he cares about. And again, I think having been around him, knowing what a positive person he is, and also having that football side of things to where, it's all about getting guys amped up and getting guys ready to play and go out there on Saturday afternoon. I think those are all things that he was always really good at. And I think you're seeing it now. He's got a tremendous ability, I think, for a couple of things. Number one, he's a calming influence on those kids that are playing for him, and he's given them a ton of direction. And he's a very patient guy, right? And he just wants what's best for those guys and tries to, put them in situations where they can go out there and succeed. And they believe in him. And when you have the ability to make guys believe in you, I think it certainly puts you in a position where you can achieve some great things.
Yeah, Smoltz will just tell you that he was a better fisher than he was, and that's really the only conversation.
I did read that. You're right. Imagine that, John bringing it back to him being better than somebody at something. Imagine that.
Tom, I want to ask about the commercial, the famous Nike commercial, "Chicks Dig the Long Ball." How did that commercial even come about? It turned into, and is still probably, the most famous baseball commercial that has ever existed.
It's funny. Now, when we talked about the broadcast we all did earlier in this show, that's one thing I probably did forget is, we talked about that commercial during the broadcast. And I think that was the first time I really realized how mad John was and is that he was not in that commercial. And that certainly continues to be true to this day. But anyway, it was one of those things that, look, I was a longtime Nike guy. Greg was a longtime Nike guy. And, Nike was getting more and more into different things. And I remember my agent talking to me about maybe doing something. And I was like, yeah, sure. I mean, I'd be interested in doing it or doing something and not knowing what. So I think it was the kind of thing that, honestly, my agent kind of prodded them a little bit and tried to get them to do something and kind of kept putting a bug in their ear about trying to come up with something. So when he called me and said, hey, Nike wants to do a commercial centered around, the home run chase and you and Doggy and whatever, you interested? I was like, of course. Everybody wants, to have a commercial or something, right? I mean, you want to have those endorsements. So yeah. I was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. I'll do it. If Greg will do it, I'll do it. And so, truth be told, we did that commercial over a road trip, and we did the first part was in Philadelphia, where you saw a lot of the batting practice stuff and a lot of the Rocky themed stuff and things like that. And then the second half, we did it in Florida, where there's a lot more of the skeet swinging at the skeets and, the sauna scene and all, kind of all of that stuff. So I think as we're doing it in the second phase of it in Florida, Greg and I are like, what the hell are they doing with this? Where are they going? What is this? What is this going to even be? And I remember I knew it was coming out, and I walked into the clubhouse in Atlanta in Fulton County Stadium in the old ballpark, and I'm in the players lounge getting something to eat. And the next thing you know, here it is, it comes on. And I'm just thinking, oh my God, I'm here. I'm trapped. I can't go anywhere. Everybody's watching this. I hope it's good. I said, I had no idea. And I have to say, when it came on and it played, I was like, internally, I was kind of like, that was pretty good, and the reaction from guys was good. But I think over time, it took on a life of its own. And I think largely because, for people who know Greg and I, that was so out of our element. I think for the fan base, fans think they know you through watching you on TV, right, and seeing you in interviews. So they think they know you, which to some extent, I guess they can get a sense for who you are and what you're about. And I think for people too, it was the kind of thing that it was so uncharacteristic for Greg and I. And I think that's what made it fun. And it was funny. It was silly. It was funny, yeah, but it turned out to be a really good commercial.
I want to ask you about something you recently said, and it's a really interesting conversation to me lately, and something that's very popular in the baseball world right now. But you obviously played in the height of the steroid era, correct? The Mark McGuire's, the Barry Bondses of the world. And you were recently talking about it and said that you think it is the right choice to not have those guys in the Hall of Fame, but you're not closed-minded to it. Said you're more open-minded to it if somebody is able to change your mind about it. Is that still right, where you stand about the situation?
That's fair. And I think it pertains more to Barry and Roger probably than anybody else, right? And I think it's the kind of thing that As I get older, I guess I get a little bit more mellow and a little bit less hard-headed about some things, and I understand that sometimes you have to have discussions. And look, Barry and Roger obviously are the poster child or children for that whole era, and listen, I think in both of their cases, I think you can make an argument that they were Hall of Fame type players before maybe there was some suspicion about some things they might have been doing.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you unequivocally that there's nobody in the Baseball Hall of Fame that ever did that.
Right.
I can't tell you that. And I think it would be naive to say that we don't have somebody. But, so given all those things, again, I think it's the kind of thing, okay, well, at this moment, I think it's the right decision for a lot of reasons. But if you feel strongly that you think it's wrong, then persuade me. Tell me why I'm wrong, right? I don't think I have the burden of proof on me. I think that, if you feel or somebody feels strongly that those guys should be in the Hall of Fame, okay, well, then present your case and I'll listen to you. I'm not saying I'll change my mind, but I'll listen to you.
One of my thoughts on this situation, because I kind of went back and forth on it and then landed pretty much around here. And this is, again, about Barry and Roger. I think Barry Bonds is the greatest hitter the game has ever seen. If we're just talking hitting, I think Barry Bonds is that guy. My thought went to, if you're going to have a museum with the greatest baseball players of all time, right? I feel like those guys need to be acknowledged there. And I think having like a wing, its own area where you acknowledge that this was the steroid era of baseball. It did happen. If you really want to talk about it, it might have saved baseball in 1998 with the McGwire and Sosa home run chase. So just having its own area in the Hall of Fame where everybody knows steroids were taken, there was a steroid era in baseball, but not completely omitting the fact that these guys played baseball, some of them better than anybody else has done it. And I just think that they should be acknowledged in there somewhere.
And listen, again, I don't disagree with that, right? Again, I've heard that argument. I honestly haven't given it much thought. But again, okay, well, let's have the discussion and let's talk about it, because I think on the other side, some people will probably say, well, obviously baseball fans know of those guys and they know who they are. Do we need to bring attention to that in the Hall of Fame? I don't know, right? I don't know. Let's have the conversation. But again, to your point, I think that's what makes particularly Barry different, right? If you're going to look at Barry and say, hey, he did something the year he hit 73 home runs, okay, fine. But look at his body of work before that, right? I mean, he was the best player of our generation. He was the first guy, if I'm not mistaken, to have 400 home runs and 400 stolen bases. So, I mean, that to me is the part that I feel bad about, is that, if the home run thing was what precipitated everything beyond that with Mark and Sammy, it's unfortunate because, again, Barry was a Hall of Fame player before that. He was the best player in our generation. He did things that nobody else could do. So, I mean, I think that's where I'm a little bit more open-minded to the argument, right? Because there's a body of work there. Some of the other guys maybe who are being suspected of doing some things, it's hard to differentiate where did it start and what kind of player were they without it. So that to me is where it gets a little bit more difficult. But look, I don't disagree with what you're saying. I mean, it's almost silly on the one hand to just completely ignore it. It's a part of the game. Much like, I know it's a different conversation, but the Pete Rose conversation. But I mean, those guys did some. Barry and Roger did some really good things. And obviously they have Hall of Fame numbers. I don't know that completely ignoring it is the right way to go either.
Yeah. Tom, a couple fun questions for you before we finish up. The first of which being, in your career, who was the toughest out for you that you had to face?
Mike Redmond, catcher for the Marlins, backup catcher for the Marlins, wore me out. I feel better about it though, because I've learned that he also, I think, wore out Randy Johnson and Mike Hampton too. So it wasn't just me. But it's funny how, we all have that guy, right? And a lot of times it's not the guy you would think. I mean, don't get me wrong, Tony Gwynn had pretty good success against me, and I know some other guys did too. But to the point of just like looking at the numbers and going, oh my God, like I think Redmond hit over I think he hit over 500 off me. You know, no damage, so to speak, but you know, I couldn't get the guy out.
I'll ask the question in reverse because you also won 4 Silver Sluggers as a pitcher. So when you were in the box, who was the toughest pitcher you had to face?
Probably Randy Johnson and Kevin Brown. You know, Kevin Brown was probably, and I was good at bunting. I mean, that was one of my biggest attributes and why I won so many Silver Sluggers is because I would typically lead pitchers in sacrifice bunts every year. Kevin Brown was the hardest guy to bunt. He just had that heavy ass sinker that it moved all over the place, and it was just hard to square it up and put down a good bunt. So I would say him from that standpoint, and then Randy, obviously, just from a hitting standpoint. I remember later in my career, I faced Randy, and it was, you know, good morning, good afternoon, good night. It was 98, 99, 100. Go sit down. I was like, all right then, here we go.
Yeah, that's probably that's one of the tougher ABs for anybody, I can only imagine. So what are your thoughts on what the game appears to be heading to? I don't know if it's going to be a challenge system or eventually the automatic strike zone, but what are your thoughts there with a potential automatic strike zone in the game of baseball?
Not a fan at all. You know, I think that's a big part of the cat and mouse game of baseball. You know, I think that I understand what baseball is doing, and listen, I'm on board with what this year has been. It's a way better product to watch this year than it has been in the last 5 years. I've watched more baseball this year than I have in the last 5 years, simply because it's a better product to watch right now. I think that the three outcome game that took 4.5 hours was just not a lot of fun, right? Sitting there for 4.5 hours to watch home runs, strikeouts, and walks was just not much fun.
Yeah.
With the rule changes now, and particularly the pitch clock, you've eliminated so much dead time. You know, I got a much better chance to sit down and watch a ball game that's going to last 2.5 hours than I do 4.5 hours. You're going to lose me, and you're going to lose a lot of marginal baseball fans. So I think that's been huge. The no shifting, the bigger bases. You know, I don't know how much the bigger bases has played into the stolen base aspect of it. But stolen bases are more a part of the game, which is more fun. You know, it's fun watching. You know, I kind of laugh a little bit watching pitchers today trying to control the running game, trying to figure out when to throw over, or trying to figure out slide steps and do all those things that, you know, we had to do. You know, the late 80s St. Louis Cardinals were single-handedly the reason why I learned how to slide step, because those guys ran all over you if you didn't pay attention to them. So, you know, those things necessitate pitchers having to do some things. The no shift, I think, has been great. You know, the single's sexy again, right?
Yeah.
And not everybody's trying to hit home runs. So I think it's a much better product now. Listen, the replay thing, I get it. You want to get calls right, right? And you know, umpires are right a vast majority of the time, but you know, I do miss the occasional, not or even more than the occasional manager getting thrown out of a game because he's arguing for a call. You know, a lot of that is gone. I really draw the line on the home plate umpire in the strike zone. I do. I mean, I just think that's such a big part of the game, both for hitters and pitchers, right? I mean, if you're a pitcher and you can fill up the zone and you make it hard for an umpire not to call strikes, that's a good thing, right? I mean, if you're a hitter and you've got the reputation of being a great hitter in the strike zone and a command of the strike zone, you're going to get the benefit of some calls. I mean, that's just, to me, that's a part of the game I just don't want to see go away.
Yeah. Tom, this has been a lot of fun, man. Thank you so much for joining me. The stories, the conversations, they've been a lot of fun. So I appreciate it so much.
Happy to do it. Let's do it again.
All right. Sounds good. Let's do it. Thank you. See ya. All right. Just wanted to thank Tom Glavine again for joining me. I could do this for hours. There are so many stories to be told, and I could sit here and listen to them all day long. The Bobby Cox stories, the Greg Maddux stories, John Smoltz, Deion Sanders. To me, that is always my favorite part of getting to talk to these Hall of Famers that I get to. It's hearing the stories from the past and just laughing about them all, but also to be able to dive in a little bit on their insight of the current game and the current state of baseball and the current Braves team that Tom Glavine is watching. I have an absolute blast doing it, and I hope you all enjoy listening to it as much as I do. But that does it for this Wednesday episode of Flippin' Bats. Make sure you guys are subscribed wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Spotify, wherever. We're also on all social media. You can watch everything we do on YouTube at Flippin' Bats Pod. But that does it for this Wednesday episode. Until tomorrow, my friends, peace.